Just moments ago, the Israeli Defense Forces announced that they had launched a preemptive, precise, combined offensive to strike Iran's nuclear program. This included dozens of Israeli Air Force jets, missiles, assassinations of top nuclear scientists. You're also seeing just very recently the global nuclear watchdog saying that Iran was in breach. So this is in direct response to this finding by the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's this nuclear watchdog, or as Kyle Bass, he's a prominent investor and analyst, calling out that Iran was accumulating highly enriched uranium and could be in the process of building 10 nuclear bombs shortly. That could sow chaos around the world, particularly in the Middle East, making the world a much more dangerous place. So Israel responded, preemptively striking Iran to try to take their nuclear facilities offline. With this strike, you are seeing some of the top dogs in Iran taking a hit. In this case, it's talking about Commander-in-Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Husseini Salami, getting wiped out in tonight's attack. However, the U.S. is making a point. This is a statement from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State from the United States, making a point that this is not the U.S. getting involved. President Trump is looking to avoid the U.S. getting into another war, making the point that Israel took unilateral action against Iran, and Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel. U.S. does not want this to get into a much bigger conflagration, a much bigger fight. And so, not surprising, you're seeing risk assets sell off 1% to 2% in the after hours. And then you're looking at gold, so a safe haven, jumping a bit around 2%. And looking at oil prices, that I think is the key driver of what's going on here in terms of why assets are so volatile, up or down 2% right now, is because you're looking at oil prices going parabolic around 13% at the time of this video publication. And that's because Iran produces roughly 3 million barrels per day, or roughly 3% of the global market. And that alone, 3% of the global market, may not be enough to really send things out of whack. I mean, the concern is if they get taken off the market, then China, who's their chief buyer, is going to need to figure out, okay, where are they going to get their oil from? And then if they have to tap the rest of the market, you could expect prices to go higher. That's actually, I'd argue, not the key reason why there's, you're seeing the price of oil go up so significantly. The real concern is around the Strait of Hormuz. This is about a 20-mile wide shipping lane that Iran could harass or mine, which this shipping lane covers about 20% of the world's supply of oil. So if this gets disrupted, then you are talking about the potential for a much, much bigger oil spike, talking about $100 plus sort of barrel per oil. And that has significant ramifications for the economy, for inflation. That's a huge impact. So what happens next? First of all, this is not financial advice. I'm going to share a bit about my own personal approach when dealing with this type of uncertainty. And also, quick plug, recently Daniel M., a premium member of the Unrivaled community, he recently wrote, literally actually just yesterday, entering my 4th year of subscription to the Unrivaled community. Thank you and the whole community for all the insights really shaping my investment journey. Excited to see what the future holds. Maybe a little too excited here because that was literally just yesterday, and man, wasn't expecting this type of I wasn't fully expecting this type of noise and volatility. I'll actually talk about that in a second because I actually called out to my Unrivaled members on Discord that this was actually, the odds were picking up that this very event could happen. And this also follows Harish, a premium subscriber, who wrote, the profits I made from just one of your letters has already covered the premium subscription for several years. So if you're looking for compelling ideas, come check out Unrivaled Investing. Also, with heightened volatility and macro uncertainty, I want to leverage AI to make my job easier to find compelling ideas and to research stocks, turning over stones faster. And so now Flash for the month of June is free. Check out the link below. On any company in the world you wish to research, first 10 reports are free. So come check that out. Just makes it so much easier to look at companies, sort of get the story, so that way you can think about it. So the initial thoughts of this attack, it is important to call out, yes, there is this volatility, but there are some folks that see the silver lining. Former presidential candidate from the Democrats, Dean Phillips, He wrote, in addition to disabling the most prolific sponsor of terror in the world, Israeli strikes on the regime present the only hope for Iranians' liberation from tyranny, a proud people who can't even walk their dogs without risk of imprisonment. And you have this voice, this perspective is echoed, talking about how they're a major sponsor of terrorism. And this could actually be a positive black swan if it ultimately results in the greater freedoms for the Iranian people. And I think it's important to reflect on oil prices. The absolute price isn't so much the issue, because right now, let's say it's just shy of $80, may have changed, as I'm recording this because it's been extremely volatile. But it's really the secondary effects, higher inflation because oil is a key input, higher bond yields because when inflation ticks up, then, the bond yields are going to follow. And then you're also less likely to have an accommodative Federal Reserve, less likely for the Federal Reserve to cut rates. And because of all these dynamics with higher yields, less accommodative Federal Reserve, you're going to have lower stock valuations. So this is why this initial move could be just the beginning. It could just be, it might just be the initial 1% to 2% shock and then things adjust, or it could be part of a bigger drop down. And this is tapping into the much bigger uncertainty, that we have here. Is this a limited one-night raid? Personally, I think this seems highly unlikely given, I'd argue, the severity of this attack. This looks like a decapitation move. Israel's looking to look for regime change, I believe, with this attack. And it is possible that based on who survives in the regime, the Iranian regime, they could possibly declare war on Israel. So then it turns into this question of, do you see some sort of escalation? That does increase the odds of potential significant retaliation. So we'll see how that plays out. This is a fog of war right now. No one really knows exactly, what's going on. How much will Iran retaliate? Will they have a sort of scorched earth approach? Will Israel succeed in fully decapitating, or will there effectively be enough top dogs, in the running the Iranian government that can keep things going and cause real trouble, possibly for Israel and possibly for, let's say, Western governments, maybe even attacking U.S. interests? Who knows how that plays out? But if, for example, they decide to make it much harder for oil to ship through the Strait of Hormuz, then I think you're really talking about a lot more chaos, a lot more trouble, because if you lose 20% of the supply of oil, then it becomes an interest for the U.S. to say, hey, we're going to do whatever it takes to fix this. Then they are interested. China will be interested. Everybody will be very interested in, hey, you need to settle this down. But that could be a $200 per barrel oil type of situation, or even more if you're talking about a disruption to 20% of the market. That's really the wild card here. That's the uncertainty that investors are going to be thinking about in the weeks ahead, is that if you're dealing with that type of oil shock, then that does flow to everything else. And then the knock-on effects are huge because, that also makes it tougher for, let's say, the U.S. to refinance its debts because of higher yield. That means the deficits are harder to control. That means, if you have that type of price spike, then it goes through to the economy. Fewer people are going to be flying on airplanes. Then you have the economic toll, then possibly an economic slowdown, even though the U.S. is already running, incredible deficits to sort of keep the economy going. So there is just tremendous uncertainty with this development, this geopolitical development, in terms of looking at Israel take this preemptive strike to try to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. And I think it's important for investors because a lot of folks are going to be like, oh, maybe I should go buy some Raytheon. I wish I could go buy some Anduril stock. Should I go? Folks are going to be thinking maybe I should bid up Palantir because I know that's an AI defense stock and that's going higher. But wait a second, it's super expensive. Maybe I should just go buy gold. So I think a lot of people, when they see and they experience something like this, first of all, you have this reaction of fear and uncertainty. You feel like you need to act. And I think it's important that when these types of events happen, that you are very aware of who you are in terms of what type of investor, what type of process that you run, because these types of events, in my opinion, shouldn't change the process. And, what I mean by that is that my personal approach does not waver. I actually called this very risk out to my subscribers yesterday on our exclusive Discord. Any of our premium members on our Discord can see it. I wrote it. It was a thread called like the conspiracy thread, where I suggested, based, it was effectively just based on some posts suggesting, hey, this could flare up between Israel and Iran very shortly. And even though this was front and center, and I saw that the betting markets were saying it was a greater than 50% odds likelihood that Israel would get involved, I didn't change anything today. It's not like I sold everything off, because I'm not looking to be a trader. I'm looking to find great companies that can pass my checklist, where I can say, hey, this is unrivaled for me because it has this aligned management, because the growth is going to be obvious, even if you have an uncertain oil environment, even if there's an uncertain inflation environment, even if the US has 5% interest rates or 3% interest rates. These are the companies that I'm still interested in, that I believe it's a secular story. So it's important to recognize that. And I think it's important when you're sizing up your own investments to figure out, what are you doing? Are you a trader looking to respond to every bit of noise, every bit of, and this isn't noise, this is a big development, but are you looking to respond to every piece of news? Or are you, looking for more about building generational wealth by acquiring quality assets on sale? And that's personally how I'm thinking about this. And so when I look at this recently, in the last week or two, I've been buying, a stock that I think is around 50% of its potential takeout value and I think it could happen in the next year or two. So if there's volatility tomorrow, I would likely be a buyer, looking at this dynamic. I frankly, if some of my companies sold off tomorrow, I'd love to be able to buy more. And so it's for me personally, it's about sticking to that checklist of, finding companies, assets, people that I want to partner with, no matter what that type of volatility is. Now, this could be an environment where gold and oil just outshines everything else because of the amount of money printing and the uncertainty. I mean, even Warren Buffett, he'd talked about that back in his Berkshire letters, where, there was a decade where Berkshire performed at the tune of like 20 to 30% per year for a decade, but it just sort of moved in line with oil prices. It's possible you can have an environment like that. Personally, I'm not a fan of making a bet on commodity investments, particularly as we look at the technological revolution that I believe is going to be happening in, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years, with a lot more nuclear hopefully coming online. Not the blow up my neighbor type of nuclear, but nuclear as in, hey, let's power a bunch of homes with low energy prices. That is what I'm looking for. And so I'd rather invest in quality companies and not necessarily make a bet on a commodity like oil. So that's personally my investment journey. I'm looking for franchises that ideally I could own for years into the future, or have that type of compelling valuation where if it sells off tomorrow, maybe this company is in the position where they could do more buybacks because of how much free cash flow they're generating. So I think it's important, once again, to reflect on your journey. What is your process? If you're looking to trade, that's a very different type of journey, because trading, I would say, it's about gold, it's about defense stocks, it's about, maybe there's some sort of flight to safety to US dollars and bonds, maybe, but that's sort of been waffling this year because of deficit. But if you're looking to find, compelling assets, that's another story. And that's where you need to think 5 to 10 years out. But, every investor is different. I hope this video talking about what's going on with Israel and Iran is helpful for you. Please make a point of hitting that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. You've been watching Unrivaled Investing.